because we had a lot of feedback, first of all. Thank you asking where the show was. But also, we can now call this an award-winning show, technically, because 2 weeks ago, I was lucky enough to be awarded a Cassowary Awards. A Cassowary Award presented to be my Wet Tropics Management Authority for a documentary I did, but largely for all the conservation work I've done over the years. And as I said on the night, the only person I thanked was you, because without you, there's no conservation. So that's very much our award, making this show an award-winning show.
Yay,
right?
yay. And thanks for that, Phil. But, my wife said to me, she said, look, Phil deserves that award for having to put up with me. Oh, Phil, we need to save the bird. Oh, Phil, we need to go to the wind farm. Oh, Phil, let's save the quolls.
No, we've talked about that, and as long as you keep bringing in that Prozac, the deal's still on. It's fine.
Okay, cool.
Now, let's dive straight into this, because we do like to do good news stories, and today we have one. Although, there's been a lot of doom and gloom, you've all heard it, that is real about the Great Barrier Reef. But what about this bit of news, Paul? There's one island near Gladstone at a fairly southern part of the reef that, for some reason, has seen remarkable coral growth. Kay Davis is a Southern Cross University doctoral researcher and has spent time examining water quality and coral growth around One Tree Island as a part of a greater publication called 50 Years of Sporadic Coral Reef Calcification Estimates at One Tree Island, Great Barrier Reef. Is it enough to imply long-term trends? Well, that's what the report's called. That's a really good question that we should actually ask Kay Davis. And Kay, welcome to Conservations.
Thanks for having me.
Kay, what can you tell me about what seems unlikely? What's happened to this coral around One Tree Island?
So in 2009, there was a Cyclone Hamish, that hit One Tree Island, and it decimated a lot of the coral around there. And the 5 years after that cyclone, we saw decreased levels of what we call calcification, which is coral growth. But we went back in 2017 and did some water chemistry measurements and found that calcification has returned to its original rate, which is really great news.
Now, well, last I checked, Gladstone was, I think, a mineral gas town, and at least visibly, when you drive in, it'd be the opposite of a place where an environmentalist might live, But how is it then that seemingly the water quality in this area is so good?
So One Tree Island Reef is 20 kilometers southeast of Heron Island Reef, which is, you board the boat to Heron Island from Gladstone. It's about an hour and a half to 2 hours by boat, and then another 20 kilometers from there to One Tree Island. So it is relatively unimpacted by the local coal industry. Like, it doesn't affect the water quality so much so far offshore.
Right.
And Kay, look, One Tree Island has been a research station for quite a long time, 50 years or more, I think. Does the fact that there has been also low human impact on there? I used to work on the reef, and it was so hard to get people not to tread on corals and people coming in with boats. Would that have played a part in protecting that part of the reef?
Yeah, so it's a scientific research zone only, meaning it's just the two managers that live on the research station year-round with scientists coming in and out. Now, so that means there's a lot less boat activity, less tourists, accidental kicking of reefs, and the sunscreen and, the chemicals that humans just naturally bring. It doesn't happen as much at One Tree Island as it would, say, on Heron Island. So that, I believe, that allowed that ecosystem just that little bit of extra space and time to recover.
Right.
And, you mentioned that Cyclone Hamish really wrecked the place. What was the level of optimism? I don't know if you were there the day after, but after that, you can't have been optimistic.
Well, I didn't start working in this field until a few years back. So actually, in the few researches on water chemistry after Cyclone Hamish, they didn't take the cyclone into account as much. They just looked at the water quality. And so...
have you come across this before in your research? It seems like these corals are regrowing in, about 8 years? 8 years space, which feels like it's really fast.
Yeah, and there's been some studies done that it takes up to 20 years for coral reefs to recover, if they do indeed recover. However, we're seeing some areas that at this point are not yet recovering, and we'll have to continue to monitor those reefs and see what happens to them in the future.
So you would be referring there to Lizard Island, of course, on the top end of the Great Barrier Reef?
Yes, I would be referring to Lizard Island. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Now, what is the situation there? Sorry, cut you off, Paul. Because I know you've spent some time on there. Is it even worth comparing One Tree to Lizard Island?
Well, it's hard to compare the two because One Tree Island was hit by one cyclone in 1 year, whereas Lizard Island was hit by a cyclone in 2012. It was hit by another cyclone in 2014, and then it was hit very hard by the mass coral bleaching event of 2016. So it was 3 incredible stress events in quick succession, one after the other. And, you know, One Tree Island, one of the reasons that I believe it was able to recover was because it was given time between the stressors, and it just has the conditions that it needed to recover. And it's, you know, these days we're seeing that recovery is more difficult because not only are conditions every day more stressful, but the reefs aren't given enough time before the next major event happens to really get a foothold on recovery.
Yeah, and on global scales, we've started at One Tree, which is pretty much the southernmost part of the Great Barrier Reef up to Lizard Island. But what about say the reefs that are at the most southern extreme? Lord Howe Island, for example, I think is the most southern coral reef. How is that handling the climate?
Yeah, this year, so I'll start off by saying Lord Howe Island hasn't had any measurements of chemical metabolism, which is what the field that I'm in is called. So we decided to go to, like you said, the southernmost coral reef in the world to see what the metabolism rates were there compared to reefs, say, in the Great Barrier Reef. So we started off last year in July of 2018. We went and did these measurements of water chemistry there. And then we decided we should come back in the summer just to get an idea of yearly coral growth there. However, we were too late this year to get a baseline measurement as Lord Howe Island did bleach in January to March of this year.
Oh, what a shame.
Wow.
Yes.
Kay Davis, my guest. Kay from Southern Cross University, a doctoral researcher. We're talking about reef health, really. And Kay, I wonder if you encounter pessimism among scientific researchers. You know, when you say, okay, it's been about 8-9 years and these corals look great, do you encounter other scientists going, yeah, sure it does?
I haven't had that that encounter myself.
Yes,
I think as scientists we have to be non-biased in the way that we collect our data and the way that we analyze and present our data, because that's what science is all about, right? Retestability. And so this is, you know, these results are what the science told us, and other scientists have been very respectful of that. And I think everyone, including scientists, wants to hear some good news every now and again.
Yeah, eco-anxiety. So cheer us up, will you, Kay? You know, any predictions on when One Tree Island might be, at this rate of increasing calcification and coral, when she'll be back up to where it should be at 100%?
Well, now it's looking, so our rates of calcification are just slightly higher than they were in the 1970s, with coral cover, like percent coral cover, right around the 1970s value as well. So that was really great to see.
Yeah, that's excellent.
And just finally then, Kay, is there anything that we can learn from One Tree? I mean, you already touched on this, mentioning almost no human interference for the recovery of places like Lizard Island.
Yeah, so I guess the one thing that we really need to get a hand on is climate change. So the reef bleached at Lizard Island because of a marine heat wave, and those have been linked to climate change. Increasing storms have been linked to changing climates.
Yeah.
And luckily, One Tree Island didn't have another stress event. So if we can get a hold on climate change and get a hold of these stress events, then it's likely that these reefs will recover. It's not too late, we need to act.
Yeah. Hey, Kay Davis, great piece of research, and as you said, you want some optimistic news. Well, you've given us some, so we like that. Kay, really great to talk to you, and keep up the good work.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Kay Davis there from Southern Cross University. There you go.
Yeah,
so,
fantastic.
Some signs of recovery. Sure, a lot further south than the heat waves of 2016 and 17, but
yep.
Hey, it's something.
Yeah, that's right. And, who knows, they might be able to grab some of those corals. Maybe they become, genetically strong, better to withstand high temperature.
That's right. All part of the studies ongoing. You're on Conservations right now. I'm Phil. I'm with Paul. And Paul, to another good news story that's not good. Just go with me here. Many decades ago, cassowaries, a threatened bird species of Australia, frequented a place called Redlinch and Whitfield fairly often. But then suburban encroachment happened, add in a few cyclones that depleted food sources, and the cassowaries disappeared. But in a really positive sign for recovery for what is a threatened species, there's a dad and chicks now in Redlinch Valley. The downside, of course, is Redlinch Valley Estate. There's thousands of homes, school kids, school buses, dogs. So it's good news, but it's also a concern. Great news, right?
Yep.
Because there was a time after, I think probably Cyclone Yazi, 2011, it got the worst, where there was no food. And cassowary numbers really dived, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because they were going into homes to look for food and, dogs, cars, whatnot. The fact that they're in Redlinch is awesome.
That's right.
I like that. But cassowaries.
Yes. And it's the nature conflict that we get all around the world, and particularly with when you have dogs, and of course that's where we had our casualty here in Queensland.
Yes.
The only recorded case. Granville was playing with his dog, and then his brother got killed by the cassowary. This was nearly 100 years ago.
Yep.
But I mean, just recently we've had the gentleman
American
in Florida,
yeah.
and he had a pet cassowary, and that killed him. And that cassowary liked him.
I mean, that was his pet.
That's right. They were close.
If you think that's what it can do to someone you like.
Yeah.
No laughing matter for those kids around that area. So, and hopefully the parents. I mean, isn't it a treat? You see one and you just get it. Giddy.
Exactly.
It's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah.
But stay away from the cassowaries. But I just simply love that they're there. But it's an unsolved, ongoing problem of urban encroachment.
And it's healthy because those populations do come from the Stony Creek, which is above there. And I've seen those birds on my walks that I do up there all the time. It's just gorgeous country.
Okay.
It's directly above Redlinch.
So that connects up to what, like the Coranda area?
Yeah, it connects up to Coranda. The Coranda Railway goes through part of that escarpment. And you've got the Lamb. There's a whole these famous little landmarks that you can walk to, and Stony Creek Falls, of course, and then you can just literally go straight down to Canopy's Edge
you can
in
catch
one
the train.
spot, and straight down to we thought about jumping on the roof one, and you can also go straight down to Camarunga and Redlinch. So those birds that are up there have been growing in population, and then when the chicks get booted out of the nest from Dad, actually he runs along and he just sort of like now, and he just darts off, and they're sort of like, Dad, huh? Where'd you go? And that's the last I see, and they've got a new range.
So these cassowaries may or may not be catching the bus or the train to get to Redlinch.
No,
probably
not. No.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Alrighty, so now we've got about 5 minutes to go. You're listening to Conservations on ABC Far North. I'm Phil. I'm with Paul. You've got some interesting news headlines from around the world.
Yeah, there's so much happening online. It's just hard to know which stories to omit.
Yeah.
But I mean, the first thing, we are an award-winning show now, but I think this is going to require extra costs for the ABC. We're going to need bulletproof vests, and we're going
Really?
Yeah, because apparently, Phil, from the Committee to Protect Journalists and the Dart Centre for Journalism and Trauma, environmental reporting is now one of the most dangerous fields of journalism.
What?
Yep. So
are we safe?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe they didn't like us. That's why we got the award. It's like, put a target on your back. Yeah, but it's true. It's actually only second to war reporting, and the stats are quite high. 29 people have died in the last few years reporting, and they're reporting on really important things of products that we use that a consumer would like to have a choice on. Sometimes going, oh no, I don't want to do that because that's very exploitative. It's bad for the environment or the villages or whatever. Yeah. But if it can't get reported, if you have essentially a news blackout, then we can't even make choices on everyday items because we don't know the story behind the sourcing of that raw material.
Yeah.
And apparently it's dead equal to narco reporting.
Jeez.
So it's as
narcotics.
dangerous. Yeah, so the narco smugglers like Pablo Escobar. So reporting on him is the same danger about reporting on cassowaries, apparently.
I don't feel safe at all then.
It's absolutely is. But there are some great news stories coming out there. How's this one, Phil?
All right.
In the Philippines, there's a new law out called the Graduation Legacy for the Environment Act. And this is a bill that every student's got to plant 10 trees, otherwise they don't graduate.
That's unreal. Back in my day, it was unless you return all your library books, you don't graduate. Remember?
That's right. I remember that too. So I mean, there you go. And the bill states that over the course of one generation, it'll be responsible for 525 billion trees.
Jeez. Because Philippines so populated.
Exactly. There's 12 million students graduating every year, and from colleges. So that equals 175 million new trees.
That's
being
awesome.
planted.
You cannot graduate unless you plant 10 trees.
Yeah. And here was another one. How do you increase your solar output when all your land is needed for agriculture and housing?
Yeah, well,
Where do you
that's
put
the current issue. Yeah, well,
Yeah. You put it on the water.
on the water.
You float it. Yeah. So in Japan, they've got 73 of the 100 biggest of these floating solars.
Floating
power sector.
solar farm.
Yep. And when you put a solar panel on top of water, there's cooling effect underneath the water between the water and the solar panel, cools the panel, and it is 16% more efficient.
Okay.
It stops evaporation on the water surface, which is super needed. It's not using up any agricultural space. It stops algae blooms. So if you've got fish in the water, it will massively reduce the chances of algae harmful to fish stock under there.
Gee,
so
well,
it's just win.
Well,
More
when
efficient.
you fly to the Netherlands, you fly over that. If you're lucky enough to have done that, there's the wind farm that's in the water.
Yes.
Just when you say that out loud, having a floating solar farm, it feels so practical.
Yeah,
I feel like, duh, why don't we do that?
And put it on a hydroelectric dam, for instance.
Yeah.
And you're protecting the water that's in there. And we know pumped hydro it's a value. That water is an energy source. And not only is it protecting it from evaporation, but you're right next to the grid that you've already got. You just pump that straight into it. It's just a brilliant idea. And China's now bringing out massive ones, and South Korea is going to have even a bigger one. They've got them in the Straits near Singapore and such. So floating things. Now, the last one,
okay.
Very, very quickly, the doomsday vault has been questioned a couple of years ago that it might not last until doomsday because the permafrost was melting.
Right.
And flooding it. Now they've found that the permafrost is actually 90 years ahead of schedule, 70 years ahead of schedule. 2090 it was supposed to melt.
Right.
But the funny thing is it's actually good news for some things. Elephants.
How's that?
Because mammoth is not, mammoths had lots of ivory, and their ivory is not banned by the ivory trade agreement because they're extinct.
That's right.
Technically not endangered.
Yeah.
And they've just now been finding, scientists have been taking DNA samples from ivory in the Southeast Asia, and most of it's mammoth. There's 500,000 tons in one Russian ice field, and it's worth
mammoth
1,000.
tusk.
Yeah, it's all getting exposed. So. Good news for elephants.
Bad news is we are out of time. Thanks for another awesome episode of Conservations, Paul.
You're very welcome, Phil.
News time, 11 o'clock.